Welcome to 10 questions every executive should consider when formulating a cloud strategy to ensure there are no surprises. Yeah, that's the interesting thing about new technology. We usually do have a bit of surprise along the way. I'm Mark S.A. Smith. I am with the Bija Company. I've been helping people buy disruptive technology for 36 years. Started off in test and measurement and been working with IT for a very long time. And so I've teamed up with Jim Steinbauer, who's the Global Partnerships and Alliances with Equinix, to talk with you about these questions. Today's program is brought to you by Arrow and NetApp. Jim, say hello.
Hello, Mark. How you doing?
It's a great day in the neighborhood, my friend. Let's share some really interesting insights with our friends that have joined us for this webinar. So let's start with a polling question. For those of you that have joined us here, what is your most unanswered question about the cloud? And we've given you 5 potential answers here. Is it the performance of the cloud? Does that provide you some concerns? Perhaps there's a lot of different ways that go into the cloud, and you might be confused. So is there some big confusion there? One of the things we've learned is that an executive confused will not choose. Perhaps it's the security of the data that concerns you. Yeah, you've been probably buying from Amazon for the past 17 years or 18 years, but there still is some concerns about that. Or maybe data sovereignty. Who controls the data? Who owns the data? And then perhaps it's the operating costs. You might have gotten a bill that you didn't expect when you have gone into the cloud. So let's just see what the data shows from this question. So let's end the poll. Here it is. Look at that. Operating costs, top of the list, 43%. Jim, any surprise about that?
Well, not really. I see, obviously, people are always concerned with cost, and that's a lot of the day-to-day stuff. Not really that surprising. The security coming in second there, it looks like it is pretty consistent as well with a lot of the things that we're seeing there. People are wanting to make sure that their intellectual property, their data is secure, and I couldn't agree more.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that information with you, and we're going to be approaching some of these questions today on this event. So let's just kind of set this up and talk about why you as an executive must consider these questions. Data strategic. Today, data is critical to the organization. Most companies run on data, processing data, making decisions with data. And without data being available and secure, your success is limited. Data has value. And of course, the more value it has, the more carefully you must treat that data. It has mass. With that in mind, it takes a while to move data sets around. And while it seems like it moves pretty rapidly, terabytes of data can take an extremely long time to move through the network. Data has temperature. Hot data is way more valuable. Data that was just accumulated has way more value than cold data that's been around for a while. And you certainly don't want to be paying for cold data the same way that you're paying for hot data. And data has cost. Cost to secure, cost to store, cost to process, cost to oversee, cost to maintain. And if you get this data management wrong, you can lose your competitive advantage. And that's why we really want to focus on these questions about how to use cloud to maintain a competitive advantage. See, some of the challenges that we have today is data tends to be locally in your private data center. We've had that for quite a while. And we've been putting data into the public cloud. And for Amazon and Azure, for example, a lot of folks have been using colocation as a way to extend their data centers, especially when they run out of power and cooling. And there's this concept of the edge that we'd like to explore with you today. And so some of the challenges that we face is moving that data from one cloud to the other, especially large data sets, and then managing that data consistently across all 3 of these potential locations, limiting risk of the data movement, also of where the data happens to sit, and then integrating technologies into these existing environments. So that's what you're up against. So the first question we want to ask is, what applications, which of our business applications can move to the cloud and still deliver performance expectations of our team and our customers, both now and in the future? And so with that question, you can take a look at all the different things that we can do within a cloud. The most popular way has been to accelerate DevOps. Most all DevOps are now in the cloud just because it makes it so simple to spin up an instance, do the DevOps, and then take it down. So you're not paying for it if you're not doing DevOps. But moving into other elements, such as building cloud hosting infrastructures for customer events and customer issues, integrating cloud data services together, protecting and securing that data, optimizing unstructured data, which is becoming more and more important, gaining data center efficiencies, so only putting things in the data center that make you money, delivering data insights and control to your executives and your board of directors, or to those people who have to make mission critical decisions, simplifying and automating the processing and mining of your data, and accelerating workloads and analytics. These are some of the typical cloud outcomes that you can get along the way. So what data must you control is really the next question that we have to consider here. What data must we maintain ownership and control of? That is, by either a mandate or a customer contract, we cannot have that data in a public cloud where somebody may be able to unreasonably access it or reasonably access it. So where can we reasonably have any data residing in the public cloud? So some of the characteristics that you have to think about is, how is your data distributed? Is it stored in multiple locations? Does it come from different locations? So you're gathering information from customer sites or perhaps Internet of Things devices. It's dynamic. We're always having an influx of constantly changing data. So you have to know where the data is coming from. You have to know if the data is real. You have to know if you can believe the data. And the data is diverse. We have structured, unstructured, machine learning, all kinds of streaming video these days, generated both inside and outside of the organization that we have to pay attention to. And of this distributed, dynamic, and diverse data, you have to decide which of this data can reside in the cloud, or you need to keep that local. And some of this just requires some thought processes and some analysis to make sure that you've got the right data in the right place. And we've got folks that have been looking after data like this for a long time. And if you're concerned about how to do this, let's have a conversation, and then let's talk about that. Let's talk about the edge of the cloud a little bit. What's the difference between having data reside in the cloud versus at the edge of the cloud? And what's the blend that might work best for us? Jim, why don't you share with us the whole idea of the edge and why it's so important for people to consider, for executives to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this is one of the areas that a lot of companies are spending a lot of time on and really creating a lot of advantages for themselves. And quite honestly, this is an area that NetApp has spent a lot of time on and can help customers with as well. The NetApp data fabric strategy is really about creating options for customers and making all the great value that they've created over the last 30 years. I think they're actually celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. So over the last 30 years, and being able to make that value available in all the different types of environments that data might need to reside in. And so I think NetApp's, the fact that they've been working with Equinix for the past 4 or 5 years on understanding the role we play and have developed an appreciation for what we're doing to enable access to the cloud and the role we play with the cloud providers and hybrid cloud enablement in general, has led them to start to refer to this edge component as cloud connected colocation. And as you mentioned, so yeah, some of the analysts are calling it cloud edge, whatever someone wants to call it. It's a new part of the way that IT platforms are being designed and being able to take advantage of the flexible capabilities of public cloud while still maintaining ownership, control, and performance that your data requires. So if you go to the next slide, maybe explaining about Equinix and who we are would be the appropriate next thing to do there. Thank you.
I think that's a really good idea.
So people might not have heard of Equinix. So a good place to start is really explaining our history of really, we were created to be the peering point for the internet, or the neutral locations where the network providers physically connected to one another. So we've spent the last 20 years doing that and providing that neutral, safe environment for what started with the network providers coming together. And if you think of, obviously, the internet being the network of networks, they really required this neutral place for their edge nodes to be located to physically connect to one another with these, what we call cross connects, or internet exchanges, different technologies that have come along, which we also refer to as interconnection. These, as the internet has grown, obviously Equinix has grown into the largest data center provider in the world now, with over 190 locations in 48 global markets. And as it's grown, the internet, obviously, and the overall digital economy has grown with it. So it's been an interesting story there that not the average person needs to really necessarily know about, but it has impacted all of our lives. And really what we're doing now is cloud is the next step in that evolution. And they're obviously taking advantage of what's going on within Equinix and what's located within Equinix to be able to gain access to their customers there. One of the fastest growing segments is this public cloud service provider segment. I like to refer to it as AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google, all the different public cloud providers. And they're taking advantage of this network density within Equinix and establishing their own edge nodes in order to make this different types of connectivity with their customers, either through those network providers or directly with customers, which is creating some pretty exciting new ways enterprises can incorporate the advantages of public cloud into their current IT infrastructure. We'll get into a little bit more about this, but that's really the role that Equinix is playing, and what we'll talk about here is helping to enable that connectivity and those new creative options for enterprises to take advantage of.
Right on. I think it's really interesting, Jim. As an electrical engineer, I find that the work that you're doing with Equinix to be just absolutely fascinating. Somebody's got to hook up all these various cloud providers together with low latency and high bandwidth. And when I discovered you guys, yeah, sure, you're the ones that make that happen. And so we'll talk a little more about how being at the edge provides a strategic as well as tactical advantage to businesses who are wanting to go into the private cloud business. So to summarize this particular question, build strategies for future applications that factor in latency, location, federation, and autonomy, as well as determining placement at the edge, cloud, and in between, says Thomas Bittman, who is with Maverick Research, and the report, The Edge Will Eat the Cloud. And he's doing things with Gartner. So let's move on to the fourth question that you need to think about. What are the gotchas that cloud might have? So the question is, what concerns, such as security, performance, control, vendor lock-in, compliance, uncontrolled costs, which showed up as the highest concern in our questions of the poll today, contractual demands, which of these might hold us back from incorporating public clouds into our IT infrastructure? Well, here's a list of things that are creating challenges. Now, we're not going to go through all of these, but Jim, I'd like for you to comment on some of the things that you see with customers and executives with most compelling things to consider.
Yeah, no, and I love our polling question at the beginning. It really was very telling there, because really, as you're deciding where to put your data, cost is certainly one of the main things to consider there, along with performance, obviously. But there are a lot of other areas that people need to think about with data sovereignty laws that are being created and evolving very quickly. It's compliance and the ability to meet all those regulations, as well as meet all of your expectations from your users from performance perspective, as well as keeping costs down. It's a fairly complex environment when you think about it, but However, you can take advantage of what's available to you and be able to avoid mistakes. Because quite honestly, some companies, are honestly making some mistakes as they go forward. And I believe the more educated you are going into a redesign or incorporating hybrid cloud into your IT platform design, the more educated you are on what your options are, the better you can be, the better you can design that platform, and the more you can avoid those potential mistakes.
Right on. I think we're seeing a massive change with how we're architecting systems. The traditional way of approaching this is to figure out what you need for the next 5 years and then bring on server storage and networking that are going to take care of you for the next 5 years. But the problem is, thanks to Moore's Law, you're buying that technology at the maximum possible cost, and at the end of 5 years, it's going to be valued at a tenth or less of the price you paid for it. You also end up being radically over-provisioned for the first year or so, and then radically under-provisioned for the next 3 years. And any executive who has other options, such as outsourcing cloud and that kind of nature, looks at this and says, this is a ridiculous and stupid business model. And so what that means is that we are having to take a new approach to how we consider architecting and deploying our infrastructure, especially given the fact that most of us have accelerating amounts of data that we have to bring in, manage, deploy, and protect. So with that in mind, if you have questions about how you should go about architecting your system, let's have a conversation. Folks that have been doing this for quite a while and are staying at the cutting edge of how to do this with the most amount of security and the most cost-effective way possible. Excellent. Let's move on to the next question. Question number 5. What about your communication options? If you think about it, if you're using traditional internet speeds, it can take you a couple of weeks to move around a terabyte, and that's just not practical. So how do we choose the right connectivity option to the public cloud for our team and also for our customers? And this is where we gain a lot of advantage in working with the edge. Jim, share with us your insights on how this works.
Yeah, no, I think, again, understanding the available options is critical. And here on this slide, we're comparing connectivity options to Microsoft Azure via the internet versus 2 different types of what Microsoft calls express route. It's a dedicated connectivity option that avoids the internet. And understanding these different connectivity types and which workloads might work better or worse in which one is a pretty important part of a company's journey to the cloud. Internet access, obviously everyone's familiar with that, but there are some downsides of performance and security that might not work for all production type of workloads. What I like to call long haul express route access, if you will, a private connection coming in via a private WAN circuit from a customer's data center on-prem or wherever it might be, certainly provides a more consistent performance level and security level. But we still have a physics problem there, right? There's still a distance that data needs to travel that might not be able to provide the performance level that a production environment does require. And there's this edge presence that we talked about, but edge express route access, where you can actually, in this image, we're talking about, we're demonstrating replicating your data. So the data 2 image there via some type of private WAN connectivity or whatever connectivity you want. But that secondary data or that replicated data actually sits in the same 4 walls as where Microsoft Azure has decided to deploy their edge node, their express route node, and you can be located and have your data located within feet of where that edge node is, and a dedicated 10 gig fiber cross connect there. And really understanding how that's different than the other ones and what that might enable is helping businesses be able to really take advantage of public cloud in new and exciting ways.
I think this is an important concept as we move to applications that require lower and lower latency and faster performance. When 5G rolls out next year and people are expecting to get gigabit types of bandwidth to their mobile devices with low millisecond latency, and they want to have augmented reality or virtual reality, for example, this is the only way that we can deploy and make sure that those customers get the experience that they expect. And so if those are on your radar map, you got to think about this now.
And Mark, one of the things I have found is that I haven't found many customers that are trying to find less secure and lower performing deployments. So they're being able to understand all the options, and even if you don't necessarily need them today, but understanding what's available is really becoming more and more important to enterprises.
That's right. Now, all executives are looking at least 18 months into the future, if not 24, 36, and more. And so that's why we're having this conversation. These are the questions executives must be asking so that they can be in play when the demands for these capabilities to be there. Let's move on to the next question, which is, can the vendor keep up? As your technology demands accelerate, and the vendor that you're working with keep up. So one question that you could ask to identify this is, what companies of the size we expect to be in 18 months use this approach now? And what is the financial impact if we grow faster than expected? Now, this question is just to identify the viability of the vendors that you're working with going into the cloud. If you use one of the top 5 cloud providers, you can rest assured that they're going to be able to keep up with the demand, because they're looking 5, even 10 years out in the development of their networks and their compute power. So just make sure that you do your due diligence with this. We won't spend any more time talking about this particular question. That's all you really need to think about right now. The 7th question is, can they deliver under stress? Stress is inevitable. We had an earthquake in California this morning, had a 4 point something or another, and we've had 2 hurricanes in the United States in the past 12 months, and blizzards on the East Coast. And these kind of disasters can stress systems both locally as well as in the cloud. And so the question becomes, what is the cloud provider's disaster recovery and business continuity strategy? And when was it last tested? So you need to dig into, can the people that you're choosing for the cloud really handle unexpected situations? And you have the acts of God, as we like to call them, or in the acts of man, as we need to call them. And so as you think about these elements, just make sure that you do your due diligence in this area as well. The 8th question is about portability. What if you need something new? What if you have a business model pivot that demands that you do something different? Or what if you're acquired by a company? Or what if you acquire a company and you need to change how you deploy your IT? So the question becomes, will we be able to easily and cost effectively move our data between multiple clouds and other IT environments? If you're new to the cloud, you may not have been surprised by the big bill that can come your way as you pull your data out of the cloud. A lot of people are surprised that there's a data egress charge for a lot of cloud providers. And if you're moving lots of terabytes out, you can end up with a 4, 5, 6 figure bill for the cloud egress, and that might shock you. So you need to be thinking about that. So Jim, share some of your insights on how being at the edge can solve this particular issue.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to, and I think this is the area where Equinix is really trying to leverage the platform that we've created because of the role that we played in developing the internet. And actually, we're doing the exact same thing for cloud, which is really creating flexible options for clouds to connect their services with customers. And of course, all the major cloud providers are leveraging the global footprint that we have grown into, and the network density to do just that. So just like the internet exchanges that we created allowed network providers to more efficiently and dynamically connect to one another. We're doing the same thing with this concept of cloud exchange fabric. And we've deployed this in 25 of our 48 global markets in order to help enterprises do the same type of thing that the network providers were able to do. So it's a proven technology. There's really nothing new here. It's the cloud providers developing an edge node, if you will, for their services, just like network providers have done with the internet, and many different providers have done with building the overall digital economy.
I think what's different here. I think what's different.
Go ahead, sorry.
No worries. All is well. I think the thing that's different here, Jim, is that the capabilities of Equinix are now within reach of the average enterprise, mid-market enterprise. And so
exactly.
It's not new. This is what was required to build out the cloud that we've been enjoying now for about a decade. It's just that you now can put your data in the cloud at the edge, and you can maintain control over it. And one of the questions
exactly.
that really you need to ask yourself, you know, in a prior question, we talked about, can your cloud provider operate under stress? And the real question to ask yourself is, can you, listener, can you, viewer, keep up with the demands of your own systems? And so there's this transition that we're seeing where people use the data center they have right now, and then they spike into the cloud to handle that. So you own the base and rent the spike is a philosophy that some people are using right now. And the idea is let's have the flexible options that you can do whatever's required as you're stressed by the market or by changes in your organization.
Well, and I think having that multi-cloud access is fundamental to the future strategy for enterprises. And if you look at this slide here, the smaller blue dots obviously are indicating the 25 markets, but the larger blue dots, and you can see the major cloud providers and how many markets they've chosen to put those edge nodes in, is significant. And I would make the case that the average enterprise probably doesn't know that this is available in the global reach and the capabilities. And as we go to the next slide, they probably aren't really necessarily thinking about locating parts of creating their own edge node, if you will, right? The enterprise now can just develop their own edge nodes, just like other parts of the digital economy, the network providers, the cloud providers have been able to do over the past few decades, and be able to take advantage of performance, security, and flexibility that brings. You know, for instance, a customer could actually deploy parts of their private infrastructure like their data and connect it to the cloud exchange fabric that's located in that same building with a 10 gig fiber cross connect and have a 10 gig port and connect to as many cloud providers as they would like with virtual connections that's managed via a customer portal, and they can make changes to those virtual connections within minutes. That flexibility, that capability is not very well known, but it is certainly what the enterprise would want to be able to have. It gives you choice. It gives you a lot of different options that you can take advantage of as enterprises are starting to think about their digital transformation, so to speak, or their journey to the cloud. It gives them a lot of options, and really can become a big differentiation point for their company in general.
Well, I think if you don't have options, why bother with the cloud?
Exactly.
But this idea of being able to put your own equipment right at the edge of the cloud, I think provides a lot of interesting opportunities for people to have much higher performance and still have a lot of control over their costs. Now, if this is something that you find useful or valuable, let's have a conversation to explore what exactly it might mean for you. There's a lot of moving parts that need to be considered, and so we don't have time in this conversation, or really we just don't need to go that deep without having a specific context to understand what people have in mind, what they're trying to accomplish, what their roadmap is for the next 18, 24, 36 months. So let's have a conversation if you think this is interesting and valuable. To summarize this particular point, Jim Davis, who's a senior analyst at 451 Research, in his paper, Meet Me, Meet Me Not, said a cloud exchange platform builds on the idea of a virtual cross-connect service, where an internet exchange platform is facilitating the movement of data across the public internet. A cloud exchange is facilitating the connection of a party to a cloud service provider in a private, secure manner rather than via the public internet. And if you'd like to make sure that your data is not exposed to the public, this is the way to play. Question number 9. So what is this going to take? How much work and cost do we incur to implement a cloud or edge-based architecture? Everybody asks, what's it going to cost? And so that's always an interesting challenge. And while the answer is, it depends, there's 3 areas that you'll want to look at as you identify the costs and value of doing this. One is, are you going to harness the power of the hybrid cloud to make sure that you have the advantages of data on site as well as data within the cloud? And how do we need to balance that advantage? That's going to be one cost element, because you have to balance the cost of your on-site technology with the cloud technology. The next is, are you looking to build a next generation data center to supply your customers with the expectations that are coming your way with the 5G deployment of technology, where we're going to be just getting access to massive amounts of data, and people are going to want to have instant response. And remember, if you can't supply it when your customer wants it, your competitor is the next line in the Google search. So we have to figure out what you have in mind, what you're going to be building out, what you're going to be supplying to customers to wow them. Because customers these days want to be wowed. And then the third thing you have to consider is, what's the modernization that you're wanting to go through? Modernizing your storage through data management, perhaps it's upgrading your infrastructure, whatever it happens to be. These are the 3 elements that a lot of our customers need to take a look at. Each of these have a different cost strategy. And so let's have a conversation about what you need to have happen, some of the possibilities you need to be considering, and then how you can best put that together to affect the strategy that your executives have in mind. Question 10 here, what can you save? Now, theoretically, going to the cloud should save you a lot. Well, then the question is, what are the expected cost savings and break even for incorporating public cloud into our IT environment? And that's really where we need to take a look at a couple of other areas for the NetApp private storage strategy. Jim, share with us your thoughts around this.
Yeah, I think it's a really critical time for customers to think hard about the different vendors or the different companies that they spend time with when they're designing their IT strategy there. NetApp has really invested a lot of time, effort, and overall money, quite frankly, in being able to come up with a very impactful data strategy for their partners and customers. And NetApp Private Storage for Cloud is really that concept of being able to have your data privately reside on a NetApp filer that's located in Equinix. In this image here, we're actually showing that data being replicated into an Equinix facility there, and being able to have it sit and reside there, meet all of your compliance and regulatory requirements there, but also be able to dynamically take advantage of the flexible compute capabilities of cloud or any of the other cloud services that you might want to take advantage of. It's really the best of both worlds. You're able to keep your data private and maintain ownership of your intellectual property, your data, probably your most important asset, but still be able to maintain performance while leveraging the flexible usage-based consumption style of public cloud. And not just one cloud, but be able to have the choice between all of the different cloud providers there. So really being able to explore your options here is the exciting thing that I think as you learn what's going on in the world with cloud and where the clouds are located and where you can locate your data strategically, you're going to start to be able to learn also what other parts of your IT infrastructure you can start to deploy there, and how you can take advantage of this edge concept for your own enterprise IT environment. It's an exciting time, but it can be a confusing time. So I think spending time with the right vendors, the people who are investing in this, and being able to create options for you is critical to your success.
Indeed. One of the things to point out is that NetApp is still the only storage vendor that is solely focused on storage. Everybody else that sells storage also designs and sells other things along the way. So what that means is NetApp's sole focus is on making sure that the data that you store is well managed and creates competitive advantage. And this strategy of creating a clone of your enterprise data at the edge means that you have both the data on site for maximum possible speed when you're doing data mining, as well as putting it at the edge so that when you have to connect to other cloud providers or to your customers, that you have the best possible performance there as well. So this might be an interesting
when you think
transition.
About it, there's a lot of use cases that are coming up too, Mark, which we don't pretend to know all of them, but to be able to have all of the disaster recovery of multi-cloud access capabilities. I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty endless there. So it's allowing enterprises to take advantage of cloud in ways that they really didn't know that they could leverage it for. And it's creating a lot of data analytics capabilities and a lot of production level environments are able to take advantage of this in a way that they weren't considering cloud for many of these projects. And this capability and what NetApp has done in creating and testing and validating and creating all of the technical documentation of how to do this and all of the investments that they've made are making it easier for enterprises to be able to take advantage of that.
Right on. Lots of use cases that you might have in mind. Another potential use case is actually bringing information from the Internet of Things from lots and lots of locations through the edge into the storage at the edge, so you can get rapid response and rapid acknowledgement, and then moving that data to your location to do the data mining. And so it works both directions, both pushing data out as well as ingesting data in a high performance sense. Lots of interesting things and lots of opportunity for interesting technology methodologies to make money in the future. I can't wait to see what comes. Can't wait to see what people have in mind. So we've gone through the 10 questions that every executive needs to consider. And so we're going to ask you, viewer, what is the best idea from this conversation? Just type into the chat box what you found most valuable. And while you're doing that, Jim, we did get a question from Randy Brown. And the question is, are higher bandwidth cross connects on the roadmap? I'm assuming higher than 10 gig. And if so, is it a competitive advantage?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think certainly you're able to bond multiple 10 gig connections together, and many of the different service providers, enterprises probably don't need necessarily that amount of bandwidth, but a lot of the managed service providers and cloud providers, we're actually outfitted for 100 gig, but the market's not necessarily ready for that yet, but all of our data centers are prepared for 100 gig cross connects. But I don't think we're probably still years away, but who knows with how fast everything is moving here. I don't think you'll find that there is, once you're able to have that edge node or take advantage of that, there certainly is not going to be a bottleneck in the near term. There's a lot of creative ways to be able to bond multiple 10 gig fiber cross connects together and be able to have plenty of bandwidth to leverage cloud access.
I think that's a really great question. The answer is yes, you can buy it in increments at 10 gig. We'll bond those together. What do you need? Although sitting here today having this conversation, we might be thinking, boy, 100 gig in the future, I don't know if we're going to need that. But hey, do you remember when we were okay with 14.4 dial-up?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
And
a lot has changed even in the last 5 years. I mean, think about all the changes of bandwidth.
Isn't that so true? Just to illustrate my age, when I first started working on computers, we had 110 baud teletype machines. And yes, we use punch tape, and it's enough of that stuff. So the question to ask you is, listeners, how can we help you meet your goals? Perhaps you'd like to have a strategy conversation with some of our architects. And that is nothing more than a conversation sharing ideas. What objectives do you have in mind, and then sharing some insights around that objective? As you might have observed, we're talking about technology versus a specific product. And the reason why is we can't even recommend any kind of ways to solve your problem until we have a really good idea about your strategy over the long haul. And this is a strategic conversation that we're having here. Or perhaps you'd like for us to do some technical analysis, maybe come in and do some measurements and some assessments on what you have right now, and then take a look at your roadmap and figure out how we can design with you a strategy to take you where you need to go to create a competitive environment. Perhaps you'd like to have a conversation with us about what Equinix can offer to you about a colocation or at the edge with the cloud. Perhaps you'd like to have a conversation with us about the network, the NetApp private cloud strategy, and learn a little more about that so you can consider that as an option. Or maybe you got just a bunch of questions. Maybe we've triggered a whole bunch of questions for you to think about, and you'd like to have a conversation about that. We're delighted to have conversations. No pressure, no sales pitch. Let's just figure out what you have in mind. We can't make any recommendations till we have something that we can solve for you. If you'd like to have a copy of the presentation, send it our way. Just let us know. We can send that your way for a review and to put into your strategy for identifying the best possible solution going forward. So let us know how we can meet your goals. And what questions do you have as we're wrapping up, coming to the end of this conversation. We have a few minutes left, and with Jim and I on the line here, we can answer maybe perhaps a few of your questions. Jim has quite a bit of insight. So what questions do you have? All right, Jim, here's a question I think you can answer. Do we get to do a site visit at your location so we can understand a little better about how your system is architected?
Absolutely. I think that's extremely beneficial for partners and customers to be able to come in and actually see it. It really, I like to call it, it makes cloud physical. And, you know, in a world where we're trying to think of things in a logical and, you know, kind of cloudy way, if you will, being able to actually come in and see the data center, see where things are happening, see where everyone is located to understand the close proximity and where your assets would be located. We also have state-of-the-art conference rooms. Our data centers were built just by the reason why we were created as a company, for companies to come in and talk about what they can do within those facilities. It's more about that cross connect or that interconnection and having those business conversations. So being able to have your meetings and be able to have a whiteboard session in our data centers is something that we certainly encourage all of our customers and our partners' customers to be able to take advantage of.
Excellent. Here's another question that came in from Tony. He's asking, what is my commitment as far as time if I'm going to put a NetApp private storage architecture into an Equinix data center? What am I locked into?
Well, I think it depends on the different partner and provider that you might choose. There are many different services that are being created out of NetApp private storage for cloud, that offering. And depending on who you want to engage, you're able to create a lot of CapEx, OpEx, usage-based type of options there that range from monthly commitment to annual commitments there. It's just a matter of how you might want to take advantage of that. I think it's really a part of that design meeting or that whiteboard session of there's not really a one size fits all here. It's really being able to get in a room with the right groups of people to talk about your environment, what your requirements are, where you want to go, and understand what all the options are and really map it out, because you're probably going to have different parts of your distributed architecture actually live in all of the different areas, public, private, and edge. So it's about creating that design that's right for your IT organization.
I think that's a really great answer. The answer is it's flexible. It all depends on what you can lock down or what you have to keep as flexibility. One of the things that I have seen in changing business models, we've seen a lot of shifts in business models over the past 3 years, is that in the past, we used to focus on efficiency. And that's the reason why we'd buy an IT system for 5 years and we'd lock it down. And that created a lot of efficiency because we were able to spread the cost over 60 months, for example. And what we're moving to now is this need for flexibility. And if you are locked into an efficient model, it means you really can't move it very well. And that's that balance of efficiency plus flexibility that creates a combination of competitive advantage as well as cost performance outcome. And how we deploy that has really changed in the past several years. So if you'd like to figure out or have a conversation about how to do that, how to create that balance between flexibility and efficiency, that is probably a very powerful conversation to have with your executives and your team. And it does require us to dig into where you need to go, where your roadmap is heading, so that we can make sure we have that right balance. I expect for us to see massive disruptions in demand for compute power over the next few years. Just this past week in Las Vegas was the Consumer Electronics Show, and we had massive amounts of sensors in every possible device that you can imagine. Even saw sensors in saddles for horseback riders. We saw socks that detect when a senior falls. Just the most amazing technologies, but the amount of data that we're going to accumulate is just extraordinary. And as providers, we have to figure out how to provide the inputs and insights that our customers need to provide them with the services they're willing to pay us for, and do that very rapidly. So just some thoughts about architect strategies. Jim?
Well, Mark, I think the speed of innovation is not slowing down. I mean, those were some great examples that I hadn't heard of, but some of the video surveillance things that are going on, the ability to address some of the international laws that are being created for the right to be forgotten. GDRP is a term I've learned a lot about here recently,
and it should scare people.
It should. And it's one of those things that it's a part of our new reality that you just have to first of all know about, but then also know the options of how you can address them and be able to incorporate that into your IT infrastructure design. But there's certainly the growth of data is continuing to grow. The strategic nature of how that data is important is also evolving. And so being able to treat your data as an asset and as a tool and as your differentiation is becoming more and more important to everybody, and I believe. And as innovation continues to speed up, I don't think that's going away.
Absolutely not. And the demand for data is absolutely increasing, both from executives to be able to direct their organizations, both from government and to identify where there are opportunities and issues, and for safety and protection. The idea floated out that with ubiquitous recorded cameras, the opportunity for physical crimes declines to zero in those areas. And of course, here in Las Vegas, we have cameras everywhere, except for that one location where they happen to be shut off, but that's a different conversation. But in general, we have such a safe city because of all the cameras everywhere and a very aggressive law enforcement. And we welcome, we have just amazing numbers of people come in here, and that's just one of the applications that we can expect for us to have. And then the question becomes, how can we mine that data that becomes publicly available and provide that to our customers. So lots of interesting opportunities ahead, and I can't wait. It's a great time to be alive. All right, one last question here, Jim. What kind of budget do I need to have in mind to do colocation with Equinix and have access to that 10 gig interconnect?
Well, again, flexibility is a big part of that. I mean, if you wanted to just be able to replicate some of your data to the edge in the diagram we showed earlier, for instance, you're really talking about a cabinet or so of space, and you're talking about a few $1,000s a month type of thing. So you're really, I think a good way that a lot of enterprises are choosing to start is to be able to decide on certain workloads that they do want to move and be able to take advantage of in certain apps that are running in the cloud, and be able to move some or replicate some of their data sets to the edge, carve out a strategic presence at the edge with one cabinet or you know, 1 or 2, 3 cabinets, something like that, and you're talking about, you know, $3,000-$4,000 a month, and then to be able to have that access. I mean, for instance, a 10 gig port on our cloud exchange is $250 a month. 10 gigs.
Extraordinary. That's extraordinary. That's a hell of a deal.
Exactly, and then you can carve that up any way you want, and each individual, for instance, one gig virtual connection is also $250 a month. So you're talking about $500 a month to have that capability and that connectivity. You know, obviously, what we're trying to do is enable a market here. So there's a lot of potential there, and it's not very costly. Obviously, as you start to understand different parts of your infrastructure that needs to move, the presence will grow over time. But to be able to take advantage of it, to understand that capability and be able to start to collect that information is not very costly.
That's amazing. Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation today, friends. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Arrow, always looking 5 years out with a strategic approach to technology, and NetApp, data-driven. And then Jim Steinbauer from Equinix, thank you for joining us and having the conversation about how do you do this at the edge. And I'm Mark S.A. Smith.
Hey, thank you so much
for joining us. Likewise, Jim.
Great conversation today, Mark.
And thank you, viewer, for joining in and hanging out there with us as we explore the 10 questions that every executive needs to think about when you bring things to the cloud so there are no surprises. And with that, I hope you have a joyful and profitable day.